Following World War II, the Berlin Wall divided East and West Germany. As the West prospered, many people in the East felt left behind and frustrated. What are some things you want but can't have?
Know that I can get into any college I want to and not have to worry about it.
I want to be a Major League Baseball player.
I want a boyfriend.
I'd like my band to be successful.
Make money, be famous.
Right now, I kind of want peace.
First of all, I want to get into a pretty decent college.
To make my parents proud.
Get a job.
I want a car.
Get married, have kids.
I want a car. I want to be able to drive.
Well, actually, I have a car. With my license.
I'd like to be smarter.
Maybe a job so I could get some money.
Get a career where I'm having fun.
I want to know that I'm always doing the best that I can and that I can be happy with that.
Two young men are running from East to West Berlin. To get to the west, they must climb over a wall. To stop them, their own government shoots to kill. August 1961. A wall is built separating the people of East and West Berlin. This is the Berlin Wall. Why would someone risk their life to get over the Berlin Wall? Today, the Berlin Wall has all but vanished. All that remains is a line of cobblestones marking its route. But its legacy of oppression exists even after the rubble has been cleared away. Christopher Hilton is a British author who has studied the effects of the wall. He first saw it as a tourist in 1970.
The exact point where communism and capitalism confronted each other like two great tectonic plates was a white line drawn in the middle of the road at Checkpoint Charlie.
The wall split Berlin in two hostile worlds, East and West. But how? The answer lies in the final days of World War II. Europe, 1945. The Soviet Red Army attacked Germany from the east, American, British, and French forces from the west. Berlin was surrounded. The Soviets shot their way into the center of Berlin. The war in Europe ended with the raising of the red flag on Germany's parliament building in the center of Berlin, the Reichstag. The victorious powers divided the defeated Germany into four parts, ruled by their armed forces. The American, British, and French sectors became West Germany. The Soviet zone became East Germany. Berlin was 90 miles within East German territory. Before the wall was built, Berlin was divided into four sectors, three occupied by Western troops, one by the Soviets. What are some reasons why the United States, France, Britain, and the Soviet Union would want to split Germany into four zones?
Berlin remained until 1961 very much a single city, although divided in theoretical lines, only theoretical lines, with the Soviets and the East Germans running one part and the West running the other. The underground system was connected, the bus system was connected, the phone system was connected, the sewerage system was connected, the tram lines were connected. It was just one city, and it was unthinkable it could be divided. West Berlin was heavily subsidized by the West and prosperous. East Germany had to pay war reparations to the Soviets and was therefore very poor. So the two standards of living were wildly different on either side of the same street. And as a consequence, the East Germans began to just walk across and emigrate to the West, which wanted skilled East German workers. And East Germany began to hemorrhage at the rate of a small town a year. Well, if you've only got 19 million to start with, you know where the logic of that's going to go. It's going to go to oblivion.
To stop the hemorrhage of its citizens, the East German government barred the way west. Troops were deployed on Sunday, August 13th, 1961. They stood shoulder to shoulder, dividing the city.
People couldn't understand that this was going to be a permanent division of their city, and they really wouldn't be able to walk across the street to see their mother anymore.
It took a few weeks for a wall to be built right through Berlin. Until then, barbed wire formed the barrier. People who braved the wire could still escape. A small apartment in Berlin houses a collection of information about the wall. It is the archive of Hagen Koch, a former East German border guard. His archive gives an extremely detailed insight into the East German regime's attitude to the barrier. Hagen recalls how he was ordered to survey the new border installations.
I was 21 years old and in the border guards. On the 15th of August, I went through the city with a map, recording everything. In the afternoon, I reached Checkpoint Charlie. On the western side, people were protesting, throwing stones and bottles. So I was ordered to paint a very thick white line across the road at Checkpoint Charlie, to indicate to the Westerners, you can go this far, but not further. At the time, I believed the wall would be a good thing and prevent my country, East Germany, being drawn into World War III.
The first crudely built wall was about 6 feet high. Then watchtowers arose. The idea was that nobody could move without being seen by the border guards. Even school children tried to escape as the wall became more formidable. Falco Verkentin was one of them.
When the wall was built, I was nearly 17 years old. It was a big surprise, a nightmare for me, when I switched on the West Berlin radio on Sunday, 13th of August, to listen to the news, and I heard this terrible announcement. From that day on, I had only one thought, and that was the thought of escaping.
Falco and a young friend carefully chose the time and place and made their way towards the wall. A lone border guard walked by so closely that he might have seen the boys, but a single guard could turn a blind eye. If he had been with another soldier, he might not have been able to look the other way. After 20 minutes, the boys made it to a fence. About 20 to 25 feet away was the wall. It was about 6 feet high. Falco helped his friend over, then dropped down into the west. The wall was not impassable, so the East German authorities responded ruthlessly. They would shoot people trying to escape. Well over 100 people died trying to leave East Berlin for freedom. What are some kinds of freedoms East Germans were trying to get by going to West Germany? Every border guard had to deal with escapes. Roland Egerstorfer monitored the border from a watchtower like this one. He was a border guard at age 19.
Der Kampfauftrag hieß ja, Grenzverletzer festzunehmen.
The combat mission was either to arrest or destroy. Everyone was aware of that at all times. So what would one have done? Looking back, I would have shot. This is how we were educated. We were taught that those wanting to escape were all criminals. The greatest fear? Whenever we went back to the barracks after duty, we said, "Thank God, I didn't have to shoot." Or "Thank God, no special incidents in my section."
The wall rapidly evolved. Many buildings close to it were demolished, and the wall was fortified with a second fence, about 150 feet behind it. The space between became the Death Strip. The Death Strip ran for 28 miles through the city. At one point, over 300 guard towers kept 24-hour watch on the barrier that separated East and West Germany. The wall was continually being improved and upgraded, and obstacles were added to prevent escapes. A few openings in the wall let small numbers of people and cars through between the two halves of the city. Checkpoint Charlie was an American border crossing point. To avoid the border guards altogether, groups of students started tunneling under the Berlin Wall. It was not easy, as tunnel organizer Hassel Herschel recalls.
It is quite difficult to do, because the tunnel requires a certain depth. It has to go under building foundations and below the sewer system, 12 to 18 feet deep. You could only do that with the help of a lot of people. Around 48 work in our tunnel. There was a core of about 8 to 12, but we always had the support of other students.
More than one tunnel was dug. Tunneling was such a large undertaking that some people specialized in raising money. Men such as Wolfgang Kochrow started fundraising by approaching a ministry in the West German government.
I could help with 30,000 marks, and this money I get from the Ministry of Family and Refugee. Then we need money for technical things, for electric lines. They need gas masks, they need police blue flashlights, walkie-talkies, and so on. The tunnel was 3 feet high and 2 feet wide. 10 students live there in the tunnel for 1 week or 10 days. Sleeping there, eating there, working there.
Lookouts were posted, and the comings and goings of tunnelers minimized to avoid arousing suspicion.
The tunnel was open for 2 nights, and at least 57 people came through the tunnel, and so the name Tunnel 57.
All the tunnels under the wall followed the same pattern. They were dug from West Berlin to the east, because nobody could have kept tunnel buildings secret in the heavily patrolled border areas of East Berlin. The initial hole was dug deep, and from there the students tunneled upwards diagonally. This created a downhill run for the dirt and rubble that had to be removed. Hassel Herschel worked on Tunnel 29.
We had started digging in the west in the premises of an old empty factory. The basements were big and were no longer being used. There was only one entrance. The owner handed us the keys and said, "Go ahead, guys, I know nothing."
Ich weiß von nichts.
When we started the tunnel, we ran into various small difficulties, with getting rid of the debris as well as with the air supply. But the further we got, the worse it became. The problems quadrupled. In order to have sufficient air, we bought a pump and sucked in fresh air from the outside through stovepipes. Each pipe was about 3 feet long, and we put them together, one to another, as we got further.
NBC television paid for the pumps in return for the rights to film the tunnelers. The tunnel needed a steady supply of oxygen. It was over 400 feet long. It would take more than 6 months to dig. They sometimes hit water mains and flooded the tunnel. Even after pumping out, the tunnel would take weeks to dry. Then it was back to work. There was an ever-present threat of the border guards discovering the tunnel and destroying it. The tunnel broke through into the courtyard of this building. The border guards did not intervene, and the escapers started to emerge into the west. 29 people crawled through the tunnel to freedom.
The most important thing was my sister, my brother-in-law and my niece, who was a year old at that time. I had promised that I would try absolutely everything to get them across.
Once the friends and relatives of the tunnelers had made it through, they sealed Tunnel 29. From about 1965, the wall's fortifications took on a more permanent air. A concrete wall replaced the second fence. A new electrified signal fence alerted guards to any breakthroughs. Wooden watchtowers were replaced with concrete ones, each with 360-degree views. So that guards could rush to the site of any escape attempt, a patrol road ran the entire length of the barrier. A strip of sand was laid to betray the footprints of escapees. An anti-vehicle ditch guarded the western wall, which was heightened and topped with piping that was hard to grip. Floodlights lit up the wall, which not only divided the city, but also ran 100 miles around West Berlin to seal it off from East Germany. Why would the East German government work so hard to make the wall impassable? Why weren't East Germans who wanted to leave allowed to go? Running across was impossible. Escapees would need to find other ways out. Hartmut Richter was born in East Germany in 1948. He was 17 years old when he escaped.
Teachers told us, you live in the first state where workers, farmers, built the state, and it's the best German state. And that, I believe.
As a child, Hartmut had been well indoctrinated by the East German regime. But after 1965, he realized that the wall was built not to defend East Germany against the West, but was designed specifically to keep East Germans in.
There was music too, I liked to hear the Beatles, the Stones, Beach Boys, and so, and we hair grow,
Determined to escape, Hartmut decided to cross the border where a canal ran between East and West Berlin instead of the wall. He would have to swim 1,000 yards. It would take him 4 hours. Hartmut was most vulnerable when he had to climb over a submerged barrier. Somehow, he managed to avoid detection.
They didn't see me. I swam to the left side of the bank, and I I read, you are leaving the American sector. In German, Sie verlassen jetzt West-Berlin. I moved to the checkpoint, any meters behind. I saw a West German car. There was a lady inside, and I looked at the and asked, where do you know where I am in West Berlin? And they looked, and yeah, sure, you're West Berlin. You're from was very happy. The old lady too, who saw me there.
As the years passed, it became possible for West German citizens to visit the East. With growing traffic between West and East Germany, the guards could not search every car. Now a West German, Hartmut could travel into East Berlin and smuggle people out.
It was not so difficult. It wasn't easy, but it was not so difficult. It was a great thing for me, nicht to help people out there to escape.
But the authorities noticed that every time Hartmut visited, an East German vanished. On his 31st trip, the guards were ready for him. They discovered Hartmut's sister hiding in the trunk. They were both arrested. Hartmut was sentenced to 15 years. He was sent to this Berlin prison.
The East Germans valued Western currency very, very highly, hard currency, and they discovered a very lucrative way of getting their hands on it, which was by essentially selling people who tried to escape and selling what we would call political prisoners, people who asked to leave East Germany.
34,000 East Germans were ransomed by the West. In Hartmut's case, the bill came to $50,000.
They bought me free in November 1980. So I was 5 years and 7 months in jail.
While the East German border guards were defending their fatherland and socialism, other young men patrolled the wall just a few yards away, but a world apart. The U.S. Army maintained a daily wall patrol to assert their rights in Berlin, as did the Russians, the British, and the French. The presence of communists and NATO troops just a few feet apart made Berlin a potential flashpoint throughout the Cold War. In 1991, poor economic conditions forced Eastern European nations to open up to the West. Hungary, one of East Germany's partners in communist Eastern Europe, was dismantling its Cold War barriers. The Iron Curtain was disappearing fast. East Germans had always had the right to travel to other Eastern Bloc communist states. Now they could go around the wall by traveling through Czechoslovakia, on to Hungary, and walking across what had become an open border to Austria, into the West and freedom.
And East Germany then sealed its border with Czechoslovakia. It essentially isolated itself from the 20th century. And this emboldened the people who'd never been bold before. And the moment they started to think and act for themselves, the regime essentially was finished. The ultimate irony was that in a state run by total bureaucracy, it was a bureaucratic error that defeated it and destroyed it in the end. And the error came about like this. The East German head of government sensed that to head off the rising tide of dissent, he would open the wall to let people out. But this would be properly regulated. You'd have to go to a police station, get a visa stamp, permission. And he gave it to a man called Günter Schabowski, who was a Politburo member, and said, "At your nightly press conference, announce this." And Schabowski did not look at it because he was in a hurry. And at the end of the press conference, he said, "Oh, and by the way, there's some new travel regulations.
Also Privatreisen nach dem Ausland können ohne Vorliegen.
And he reeled them out that in future East Germans would be allowed to travel. And an Italian journalist said, when? And Schabowski said, oh. And he fumbled to look for this piece of paper he hadn't read, and looked at it and said, as far as I know, immediately.
This is a historic night. The East German government has now declared that East German citizens can pass through the wall beginning tomorrow morning, no restrictions.
East Berliners who had watched the press conference live on television started to mass at the checkpoints, first in tens, then hundreds, then thousands. East German border guard Harold Jaeger faced a situation growing swiftly out of control.
My superior called me once more and repeated that only those citizens who behaved provocatively were allowed to leave. Of course, these Germans who were there noticed that some people were being allowed to cross the border, and others not, that we held some people back. For this reason, the situation got worse, and some people did become aggressive. That's when I decided to let my colleagues open the barrier and let everybody cross. Accordingly, the barriers were raised around 10:15 p.m. No further controls were made, and East Germans literally flooded into West Berlin.
As East Berliners headed west, people started dismantling the wall. Once the wall was broken, the regime that built and maintained it could not survive for long. For a time, the East German government maintained a ghostly half-life, stamping people's passports as they passed through holes in the wall. But in less than a year, East Germany disappeared. Berliners from East and West gathered at the heart of their city to celebrate the unification of Germany. Berlin was divided no longer. All that remains of the Berlin Wall today is the border guard's patrol road. Now Berliners ride their bikes and walk their dogs along it.
Here we are, a decade and more on from the fall of the wall. There are still two distinct societies there. They're feeling a path towards each other. They're getting over 28 years of differences. Many in the East still defend the wall. They felt that they were trying to create socialism, to get rid of obscene riches, to take fear and poverty out of everybody's life. It was a wonderful ideal. They felt only having a wall would allow them to try it. And it went horribly, horribly wrong.
Did you know? Many people in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union considered the United States a hostile enemy. But after the Soviet Union's collapse, leaders of formerly communist states began to implement Western-style diplomatic reforms.
At the close of World War II, governments all over the world began taking sides. Some with the former Soviet Union, others with the US and Western Europe. And some countries were caught in the